You want to know when it really starts to hit an avoidant? It's not during an argument. It's not when you stop texting for a few hours. It's not even when you say, I'm done. It's when you go silent and you stay there. That's the moment. That's when everything begins to collapse inside them, not because they were prepared for it, but because they thought they had more time. You see, avoidants aren't wired to notice connection while it's present. They register it in the void it leaves behind. And psychologically, this is critical. The human brain responds more intensely to absence when it's paired with previous emotional significance. You were once their mirror, their emotional compass, whether they admitted it or not, and suddenly that mirror goes black. No response, no validation, no reassurance. The silence becomes deafening. Avoidants rely on distance as a defense mechanism. But when you match their distance, not out of fear, but from a place of self-respect, it short circuits their entire system. Because they were counting on your pursuit. They were betting on your fear of losing them being stronger than your desire to reclaim your peace. And when that doesn't happen, when you don't call, don't beg, don't check in, what's left is a space they never expected to be responsible for. That's when it starts. The anxiety they've been pushing down begins to rise because there's nothing left to distract them. Their old tricks don't work anymore. They scroll through their phone looking for signs of you. They stalk your stories. They replay your last conversation. But here's where it goes deeper. In that silence, their mind starts to project. It built a narrative. But this time, the narrative isn't about your flaws or how they needed space. This time, it's about the haunting possibility that they've lost someone who was actually safe, actually stable, actually good. Philosophically speaking, human beings don't fear emptiness. We fear meaningful emptiness, the kind that follows after someone important has vanished. That's the emotional gut punch avoidants feel when they realize you're not reaching out. Your silence becomes a mirror to their unresolved pain. It confronts them with the very thing they've been running from, themselves. And don't get it twisted, missing you doesn't always look like reaching out. Many avoidants won't say a word, but internally, they're spiraling because your silence triggers their abandonment wound, but this time it's not from their past, it's from the present. And it's not something that happened to them, it's something they caused. And the weight of that truth, that realization that they pushed away the very thing they now crave, it hits like a tidal wave. It dismantles the illusion of control they thought they had. It flips the script entirely. Because you didn't scream, you didn't beg, you just vanished. And now they're left to sit with that. No closure, no explanation, just space. And space has a way of magnifying what we once minimized. That's when they miss you. Not when you're texting, I miss you. Not when you're posting cryptic quotes, but when you're living quietly, confidently, without them. Let them hear the silence. It speaks louder than any words you could ever say. Silence, when owned, becomes the most powerful conversation you'll ever have with someone who once underestimated your value. Avoidants don't run from you. They run from the feeling you trigger inside them. And here's what most people don't understand. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, it doesn't mean they don't crave love. It means they don't trust love. More specifically, they don't trust themselves to survive the vulnerability that real love demands. So when they first met you, when you showed up with presence, consistency, warmth, it wasn't that they didn't notice, it's that they did. And it overwhelmed them. You became something dangerously unfamiliar, emotionally safe. At first, they interpreted that safety as intensity. Then that intensity became pressure. And then that pressure activated their flight response. But it wasn't you who were unsafe. It was their inability to sit with the discomfort of being seen, valued, and possibly loved for who they are, not who they pretend to be. You were the sanctuary they were scared to enter. And when you finally walked away, when your energy, your care, your emotional availability was no longer in reach, it created a vacuum. This is the moment they realized what they feared wasn't love, it was their own lack of readiness to receive it. You weren't too much, you were too real. And the truth is, the avoidant lives in a world where control feels safer than connection. But control is lonely. And in your absence, the illusion of safety starts to feel like suffocation. See, when they had you, they convinced themselves they were fine keeping you at a distance. But now, with that distance permanent, it turns into isolation. And isolation is never empowering when it wasn't. Your choice becomes a form of emotional starvation, and then the realizations creep in. Slow, heavy, brutal. They remember how they never had to explain themselves to you, how you noticed things they never said out loud, how you stayed calm when they were distant, yet firm when they crossed lines. You weren't just a person, you were a healing environment. And now that you're gone, they're finally able to see the difference between the chaos they were used to and the peace they lost. That's the moment they begin to miss you. Not as a habit, not as a routine, but as a revelation, a person who showed them what emotional safety could feel like. And that safety now haunts them because they remember it, but they can't recreate it. Not with someone else, not with distraction, not with superficial substitutes. They try. But when someone has tasted what authentic emotional connection feels like, everything else becomes noise. And maybe they don't call. Maybe they don't say it, but the internal shift is real. They start questioning themselves. Why couldn't I handle that kind of love? Why did I push away the one person who wasn't trying to fix me, just love me? That kind of self-inquiry only begins after the loss. And here's the kicker. It's often your withdrawal that finally forces them to do the inner work. So don't regret being real with them. Don't regret giving what you gave, because in the grand scheme of their evolution, you weren't just a lover. You were a mirror, a wake-up call, and a lesson they'll revisit long after the noise of the world fades. You were the calm in their chaos, and it's only when the calm disappears that they realize the storm was never outside. It was always within. Avoidants don't crave connection, they crave control. That's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to face. It's not that they're incapable of love, it's that they try to manage love like a chessboard, from a distance, one move at a time, always planning their escape. They feel safe when they're not emotionally exposed, when they're the one holding the leash, dictating the pace, creating space when things get too close. That's how they survive relationships. But here's what flips the entire dynamic. You pull back first. That moment, it's like ripping the wires out of their control panel. They didn't expect it because avoidants are used to people chasing. They're used to being the one who creates emotional friction while the other person bleeds. Themselves dry trying to prove their worth, but when you stop responding, when you step out of that emotional dance and reclaim your energy, they don't know what to do. That silence we talked about, it doesn't just trigger anxiety. It reveals a deeper truth, that their control was never real. It was a temporary illusion. And now the script is flipped. You're not reaching out. You're not asking where things went wrong. You're not playing into their power play. You've reclaimed your narrative. And here's what's fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Most avoidants don't fear rejection, they fear dependence. Because dependence means vulnerability. And vulnerability means they have to surrender a part of themselves they've spent years protecting. But when you pull back, it doesn't just create space, it exposes the fact that they had already started to depend on you, whether they admitted it or not. That emotional reliance terrifies them because it shatters their identity as someone who doesn't need anyone. They begin to realize they did need you, not in a desperate, needy way, but in a soul-level, grounding way that gave their chaos structure. And that realization doesn't bring relief. It brings shame because now they see the pattern. They've pushed away what they wanted most. They had control, and they use it to sabotage something real. That's a brutal pill to swallow. And once they've swallowed it, the regret starts creeping in. Quietly at first, then all at once. And the worst part, they can't undo it because you're not playing the same game anymore. You stopped engaging on their terms. You stopped dancing around their wounds. Now they feel powerless. That's the turning point. When they realize the very mechanism they use to protect themselves, emotional distance, has now become the very reason they're alone. The control they once prized has become a prison. You see, there's nothing more unsettling for an avoidant than being out of control in a dynamic they once thought they managed. And the beauty here, you didn't do it with force. You did it with absence, with silence, with boundaries. You didn't destroy them. You confronted them with themselves. And whether they reach out or not, whether they apologize or stay silent, the inner shift has already happened. That moment of reckoning where they're no longer the one who walked away, but the one who was left behind. So if you're in that space where you're wondering if your silence meant anything, understand this: you didn't just pull back. You pulled down the entire illusion of control they built their identity on. And that collapse, it forces transformation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop showing up for the version of them that refuses to grow. Because once their illusion of control breaks, the only thing left is truth. And truth never stays quiet for long. Avoidants don't always realize they miss you in a single moment of clarity. Then it creeps in sideways through memory, not logic. It begins when they least expect it, usually when everything seems calm on the surface. Then out of nowhere, something triggers it. A scent, a song, a familiar phrase, and boom, there it is. You. Not your face, not your last conversation, but the feeling you created in them, the emotional resonance you left behind, like a signature on their nervous system. That's how emotional flashbacks work. They bypass the intellectual defenses. They don't ask for permission. The avoidant mind, which prides itself on detachment, starts getting hijacked by fragments of closeness they thought they buried. Because no matter how much someone tries to suppress emotion, the body, in their avoidant assignment, mimics the emotional safety you gave them. Their system lights up with grief, not always conscious, but deeply felt. This is the hidden torment of the avoidant. They've spent their whole lives building walls to avoid vulnerability, but memory is the one thing they can't control. It invades their solitude, reminding them of moments when they felt connected, moments they didn't even appreciate when it never happened. That's when the regret kicks in, not as a thought, but as a feeling. They'll find themselves replaying the look you gave them when you listened without judgment, or how you could read their mood before they said a word. And that's when it dawns on them, they didn't just lose a person, they lost an experience they can't recreate. Because you were unique, you weren't transactional, you didn't need to control them, fix them, or change them. You simply showed up. You provided emotional safety without demanding performance. And in a world full of conditions and expectations, that kind of presence is rare. So now they sit with that realization, and it becomes louder than any argument, any closure, any final goodbye. They might still pretend they're fine, still go about their life like nothing happened, but inside, they're a fracture. Because they don't just miss you. They miss the version of themselves that existed only around you. The part of them that felt seen, felt safe, felt enough, even for a moment. That part wasn't fiction. It was real, and now it's gone. And with it, the belief that they can just move on the way they always have is shattered. You see, emotional flashbacks do something else too. They hold up a mirror, and in that mirror, they see the cost of their avoidance. The real cost, not just being alone, but losing someone who loved them in a way they didn't know how to receive. That kind of loss echoes. It doesn't scream, it haunts. And here's what they eventually realize. They didn't just lose access to you, they lost access to the part of their heart that only opened because of you. That's not something they can scroll past. That's not something they can replace with attention or a rebound or a new distraction. That's a spiritual wound, one they now carry silently. So when you ask yourself if they miss you, remember this. It's not always about action. It's about what stays with them after you're gone, the flashbacks, the feelings, the unspoken truths. You were not a phase, you were a presence. And presence leaves fingerprints on the soul. What haunts the avoidant isn't just your absence, it's the memory of who they became in your presence and the bitter truth that they let that version slip away. Avoidants are masters of emotional suppression. They bury what they don't want to feel, they deflect what they don't understand, and they run from what makes them feel exposed. But here's the catch. Suppression isn't deletion. It's deferral. And what you push down doesn't disappear, it waits. Emotion, when not expressed, turns inward. It becomes weight. And sooner or later, that weight becomes unbearable. This is why many avoidants appear emotionally flat at first, after you walk away. They convince themselves they're unbothered. They intellectualize the situation. They tell themselves it's better this way. Or, I didn't need them anyway. That's not strength. It's emotional paralysis masquerading as control. But beneath that cool detachment is a system slowly breaking down. A nervous system that used to rely on your emotional presence to regulate. And now it's crashing under the silence they thought they wanted. And this is where the irony cuts deep. The very thing they fought so hard to avoid, emotional intensity comes back tenfold when they lose you. But now it comes in private, without anyone to witness it. And that's what makes it powerful. Because for the first time, there's no distraction, no performance, no escape, just them, alone with everything they ran from. See, the avoidance defense mechanism is built on delay. They don't feel the impact of emotional loss in real time. It seeps in gradually through cracks they didn't know they had. A quiet evening turns into a spiral of overthinking. A casual photo on social media becomes a trigger. A piece of music randomly played in the background becomes unbearable. These are the moments their internal dam starts to break. Slowly, brutally, without mercy. And here's what's happening psychologically. They're entering what I call delayed grief. It's not just about missing you. It's about confronting the fact that they could have had something beautiful, something real, and they sabotaged it. That confrontation is vicious because now they have to face not just the loss, but their own responsibility in it. And they do it in silence. There are no grand confessions, no social media breakdowns. Avoidants suffer in a uniquely quiet way. Their pain is internal, often invisible. But don't mistake invisibility for absence. The emotional breakdown is happening. It's just hidden behind their pride, their distractions, and the lie they keep telling themselves that they're fine. What really breaks them is the realization that you stopped chasing, that you stopped showing up to repair what they kept damaging, that you finally gave them what they claimed to want, space. And now in that space, there is nothing left to fight, nothing left to control, only truth. The truth is you were the one place they could have healed, but now that door is closed. This is the phase where regret morphs into longing, where longing turns into obsession. But often they still won't reach out. Why? Because to do so would mean admitting they were wrong. It would mean dismantling the identity they've spent years protecting. And for many avoidants, that level of vulnerability feels more terrifying than loss itself. But the shift has happened. Internally, they are no longer the person who walked away. They are now the person who knows what they lost, and worse, the one who knows they can't get it back unless they become someone new. That's why your silence is not punishment, it's pressure. Pressure that forces evolution. Pressure that forces them to confront their emotional bankruptcy. And sometimes is the only language the avoidant nervous system truly understands. You didn't break them, life did. You just gave them the silence loud enough to finally hear themselves. And in that silence, the only thing louder than your absence is the sound of their own regret. Here's something most people don't understand. For an avoidant, reaching out doesn't mean they've figured it all out. It doesn't mean they've suddenly become emotionally available or that they've resolved the inner conflict that caused them to withdraw in the first place. When an avoidant reaches back out, what they're really saying is, I feel the void now, and I don't know how to fill it. That moment, when they pick up the phone, type your name into the search bar, or hover over a message they can't bring themselves to send, is not a sign of strength. That's a sign that their emotional armor is cracking under the weight of everything they tried not to feel. This is where you have to understand the psychology behind that hesitation. Avoidants fear emotional dependence more than loneliness. They fear being vulnerable because vulnerability threatens the very identity they've built, the one that says, I'm fine on my own. So when they reach out, even subtly, even passively, it's because the emotional silence you created has become louder than their fear. That internal war, the tug of war between wanting connection and fearing it, is now tipping in your direction. But don't be fooled. This moment of reconnection often comes wrapped in confusion. They might not come back with clarity. They might come back testing the waters. A meme, a hey, just checking in, a question about something irrelevant. What they're really doing is emotional reconnaissance. They're trying to feel out if you're still emotionally available without putting their ego or heart fully on the line. That's their protective instinct at work. But underneath that surface level contact is something far deeper, a subconscious admission that your absence changed them. Here's where your power lies, not in how you respond, but in whether or not you require change for access. This is the spiritual contract avoidants are not used to signing. They are used to disappearing and returning to the same version of you, ready to love them like nothing ever happened. But this time, something did happen. You evolved. You reclaimed your emotional value. You stopped accepting breadcrumbs as meals. And now, if they want access, it has to come through accountability. Lady, not nostalgia. What breaks the avoidant pattern isn't just silence. It's your refusal to abandon yourself when they return. It's your insistence that love cannot exist without respect, without growth, without emotional presence. And that changes the game because now you're not offering comfort, you're offering a mirror. You're reflecting back the gap between who they were and who they need to become in order to meet you where you are. Now this doesn't mean you always reject them. It means you engage from a place of truth, from boundaries, from standards, because here's the real transformation. When you stop enabling avoidance, you start demanding evolution. And in doing so, you become the catalyst, not just for their growth, but for your own. You're no longer in a cycle. You're now standing in your power. And don't underestimate the impact that has. Even if they walk away again, even if they can't rise to meet you, your presence becomes the standard they'll measure future connections by. You become the echo in their mind, reminding them what real love felt like. Love with depth, honesty, and accountability. So when they reach out, don't just ask what they want. Ask what version of themselves is showing up, because your silence taught them a lesson, but your strength in response will determine whether that lesson becomes a turning point or just another pattern.